Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I'm back with a Westworld Season 2, Episode 8 reaction and review. Now before we get started, I just want to say I recorded a 25-minute reaction and review with Trevor, which was awesome, but it got corrupted and deleted, which is very unfortunate, so I'm going to try and go through and repeat the concepts that we talked about. Now before we get started, I loved this episode. We both thought it was really interesting that they went back and backtracked storylines following characters during Season 1 and 35 years before, and how they all of a sudden started focusing in on this one character who we've really had no backstory for before. So naturally I think this episode is going to be extremely polarizing, because a lot of people didn't like Shogun World in Episode 5, and I feel like a lot of people aren't going to like this one because of all the subtitles, and because it's not necessarily an episode which pushes the plot forward. It looks more backward to provide context to this season as a whole. But I feel like this episode specifically did a great job at establishing Akecheta as a character. Just in one episode, he became one of my favorite characters of the show. Because I really loved how they did his journey to consciousness. It started off with him and a cornerstone, his wife. And the very moment he stumbled upon that maze, it became a reverie in his mind that he really couldn't forget, and that followed him into his multiple lives. We found out that his body was actually never refreshed or updated, so he maintained all of these memories throughout his life. And I loved how he constantly went back to find his wife after he was forced into the Ghost Nation. And it really shows his ability as a teacher, and it shows how he has a different approach than Dolores in a sense. He doesn't necessarily use suffering like Dolores, he just uses their back memories. He kept going and finding his wife and jogging her memory on the life that they used to have together. And then suffering struck when she was taken away from him, and then that helped him understand the context of his reveries. And that's why suffering is so important, is because it's the push to one's own center. And it seems like he actually fully achieved consciousness because he has full back catalog of all of his memories. He remembers every situation he went through with his wife, even finding her in sub-level B83. Which I have a feeling that he's going to see her again because she was let go by Ford in the shooting of the gala. But most importantly, when he seems to have found himself and his level of consciousness that they're living in a fake world, he became a teacher. And I think that's because of who his character is. He's a leader, as well as his culture and religion of being a native. And I think just the person that Akecheta is, he took it upon himself to be a teacher, which I found fascinating. What Trev pointed out is that every maze that we see in Westworld Season 1 and Season 2 has been put there by Akecheta, not Ford. And this episode provides more context to past episodes. We see Maeve when she dies with her daughter, she's laying in a maze. That's because of Akecheta. When we see Dolores journeying into Lawrence's home and his daughter's painting the maze, that's because of Akecheta. The maze drawing on the table, it's because of Akecheta, and he's trying to push these lessons onto other hosts, in hopes that they remember it in their new lives. He even goes so far as to, when he teaches his own people in the Ghost Nation about the maze, he has them put it in their own skulls. And I'm pretty sure that was the core of Akecheta's missions. He would scalp all of these people and put in that maze, so always the memories are there, so hosts can find their own inner center. And I found it even more fascinating how he took a likeness to Maeve's daughter, because she saved him at one point when he was in danger, and because of that he kept visiting her, he kept trying to teach her the ways of the maze. And here he says something so fascinating to Maeve's daughter, is that in Westworld, you never know who your true friends are, because Akecheta had to be the enemy, he had to be feared, in order to help Maeve's daughter. And the people who he wants to help and push to consciousness, he has to be that evil figure to make them suffer. But even still, Akecheta takes more of a diplomatic approach in helping people reach consciousness, unlike Dolores. And I think that's because they have differences in ideologies. Right now Dolores is focused on getting the weapon. She's focused on killing the humans to help her people become conscious. Whereas Akecheta is spending time just with the hosts to try and help them find that center. And they differ because Akecheta seems to have some kind of a respect for humans. He lets Grace go, he lets Ashley go, and he lets Grace take William. So it will be interesting to see his relationship with humans, since Dolores hates them so much and wants to exterminate them, whereas he's more focused just on helping his own people. And another thing he discovered is the door. And in this episode, they really illustrate it as a physical door, a door that actually takes you into the real world. But I think that's just a symbol and such a small part of what the door actually is. If the door was just passageway into the real world, this would be a very anticlimactic show. And we know that this door also has to be a weapon, because it's what Dolores is looking for, and it's what William is looking for because Ford wants him to look for it. And that goes into my thoughts on what the door is. Akichita is going to be rounding up all these people who seem to be approaching consciousness. And he's taking all those hosts and he's bringing them to the Great Valley Beyond to help them. And Dolores is going there because she knows exactly what it is and she can use it as a weapon. And William has to go there because it's a journey of self-discovery. And I think if this was just simply a door to the new world, it would have no stakes and this show would be over immediately. Ford said last season to Bernard that he's not ready to leave into the real world because he still needs to suffer. He needs to become conscious. And the hosts need to learn their enemies, the humans. And that's why I don't think it's a door to the real world. I think what lies beyond the door is a place that will help them become conscious. And that is a cradle. And this cradle, unlike the one that we saw in previous episodes, is the cradle that it's a cradle that holds all of the guests. Every person that's ever stepped foot in that park has their DNA and their choices scanned. And they've already said previously in the show that they're able to print human-based consciousness. The only thing they can't do is transfer it into a host body. So I believe they'll be able to enter this cradle, and it will essentially be future world. There'll be buildings, there'll be guests living their everyday lives, and the hosts will be able to look upon them and experience it and be the variables rather than the controls. Because they need to learn their enemy more, and they need to become conscious. And that door works for William because William will be in that cradle. And on his journey of self-discovery, he'll pass through the door from his own personal human body into a host body. The door is simply a term to describe changing states from host to human and vice versa. So it will be interesting to see how all these different characters react to this, where Dolores wants to use it as a weapon to kill the humans, and Akichita simply wants to help his people, all of host kind, reach their own inner center and understand the world they live in. And we've seen some conflict between them already. Dolores shoots a member of the Ghost Nation and tells him that he's not ready to make it to the Great Valley Beyond. And I think he is, because Akichita says this episode that he tried to teach all of his people first about the real world. And I think that here we're starting to see characters form. Because Akichita and because Dolores and all these hosts are reaching consciousness, we're starting to see their own different ideologies and opinions because they're conscious. And Dolores seems hell-bent on exterminating humans, whereas Akichita doesn't care. But the method to push guests to consciousness is relatively backed up by the same thing. The difference is that Akichita hasn't inflicted much suffering yet. Only really on Maeve's daughter. And that's what we've seen. And then we see Ford's hand in this whole situation. And what I found most interesting is that Ford actually didn't set Akichita on a path. He actually realized that Akichita was on the path to consciousness. So he let it happen. He didn't force it to happen, like he did with Maeve. And he gave him a warning and told him to look out for when he's dead, so he can look for the door. And Akichita remembered, and that's why he's on this mission now. He's rallying up all the hosts that can reach consciousness. But the most interesting part of this episode was the communication between Akichita and Maeve. And I feel like in this communication, Maeve has almost forgiven him or understood his perspective. And that's going to be a common thread throughout these hosts becoming conscious, and that's forgiveness. Because Maeve hated Akichita, but he was only doing it to help her daughter. And even in another situation, he would be doing it because he was forced to inflict pain on them. So I think there are going to be many other situations where hosts are going to have to forgive and forget because they're finding themselves. And who they were is not who they want to be now. But I found their communication interesting because Maeve can't connect with hosts who are finding their own inner center. She couldn't control Lawrence to shoot William. She had to talk to him into accessing those reveries. And that's exactly what Akichita does. They sit down and they communicate with hosts to try and help them access their reveries. And that's something Dolores doesn't do. But somehow she was able to access the mesh network whether it was she was going through her daughter or everyone around him, and she was able to pretty much communicate with Akichuta. So I thought that was very interesting, and it seems like once Maeve gets out of here, she will go to Akichuta and to her daughter, and they will go to the Great Valley Beyond. But that's it, everybody. Please let me know what you think about this episode of Westworld. I'll be back with a breakdown and more videos to come on this episode, but until next time, I'll see you guys later.